I think we'll start the session now.
Good evening, everyone. We welcome you in the third edition of webinar on internships by Law Essentials. This is Gurleen Kaur, legal editor at Law Essentials and a student at UPS Dehradun. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Advocate Ashima Mandla. She's an advocate at the Supreme Court of India and secretary at the Criminal Justice Society of India. She's also an advisor at Law Essentials. I would like to introduce the moderator for today's session, Mohammad Farhan C. He is the founder at Law Essentials and a student of St. Joseph College of Law, Bengaluru. Here we come to the much awaited event. Over to you, Farhan.
Thank you, Gurleen, for that warm introduction. Let us begin with the session now. Thank you for being with us here today, ma'am. We will be posing questions in form of an interview to ma'am, and she will be responding back to us. So here we start. When I was in the first year of my law school, I was in a dilemma as to where I would do my first internship. After a lot of surfing on the net and asking my close ones, I came to the conclusion that an NGO would be perfect to intern in the first instance. Some opposed it while others encouraged the same. Where would you suggest that the first year law student who is unaware of the various areas of law must intern?
So thank you, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure. And thank you all of you who taken our time today to come and join us in this webinar. I'll start you off because there is, like you said, Farhan, that you had a dilemma that pertaining to where exactly to narrow in for your first internship, because for a lot of people, your first internship, your first job, it sets the tone for the kind of career that you have, or whether or not you develop the interest in a particular field, or whether you want to continue or not to even begin with. So in all those aspects, it does definitely set a tone. And what I would like to remind all of you when we answer this question is that everybody has a distinct journey. It's not that it's going to be a tried and tested formula, that there is a particular way to go about things. I know that lately, especially in the light of the lockdown and the pandemic, we are more and more inclining towards these virtual internships. And this is an age of imparting knowledge and discussions through webinars as this one. But I can tell you that, of course, nothing beats the hands-on experience that you get in an internship. And I say it without prejudice to the present system. But yes, definitely, it's a different ballgame altogether, working in an office, whether it's a firm or it's a litigation chamber, or to work interning under any judicial any position in the judiciary and judge, for instance. What I would ideally suggest, though I can't give you like a particular answer that what your first internship should be, whether it should be a senior advocate, an NGO, as you mentioned, or a firm or a litigation chamber. But this much I can tell you, that for those of you who are in your 3-year or your 5-year courses, there is ample opportunity to at least do 6 internships and try and cover everything in that. You should, while you are in college, have that experience of what it is to work in a tier 1 or tier 2 law firm, if you can get the opportunity to intern there, how the corporate system is different than the setup that we have in litigation chambers, how it is entirely a different ballgame when you are interning and working under a senior advocate who's primarily doing briefing. So that is also a different experience. And of course, a lot of you will also move towards the judiciary or go for in-house counsels as well. But the idea is that, and I'll share a personal example, my own personal journey over here, which should throw some light on this, is that I did a pre-law internship before I started out, before joining law school. So I've basically taken a gap year after my graduation from LSR and before joining law school, because my family was of the opinion that since I'd already taken a degree in psychology and didn't want to pursue it. So they didn't want me to waste another set of 2-3 years doing something and then, not even taking it up. So I did a pre-law internship with Trilegal Delhi for about 2 months. And when I joined, and for any of us who go to these tier one law firms, it's a different ball game altogether. Um, you see the perks, you see the amenities, you see the handsome salary package that comes, and it's all very exciting at first. So I was there for about 2 months, and at that time I had completely made up my mind that this is where I want to be. And then, once I graduate, I want to come back and work at Trilegal. So my family allowed me to join law on this one premise. They said that only if you promise that you will not go and do litigation, that too in district courts, because the way they see it and the way the media and other instances are portrayed is that it's not safe for women to go out there. Though of course, after having joined the profession and now being in it for about 3 years, I can tell you that's not entirely true. Um, but at that time, this was the only condition. And I also had made up my mind in such a way. So when I joined law school, just to get variety, and it was rightly suggested by a friend of mine who was also a senior, and he said that don't fixate yourself. You can't, without having explored every possible option, decide prematurely that this is what you want to do. Because see, unless and until you have lawyers in your family, whether your siblings or your parents, they are lawyers, and you're not essentially a first generation lawyer, then at least you have that sense of exposure. But when that's not the case, then we rely a lot on the perception of law from movies. We take it from TV shows, whether we like it or not. But that's what kind of defines the image that we have towards the judiciary, the judicial system, how the legal system works, and that may be positive, and that may also be largely negative, right? Because of all the kind of content that is coming out there. That for that reason alone, it's absolutely essential that you go out there and have your own set of experiences. So my first internship, uh, technically, when I joined law school, was under Mr. Tetius Tulsi, and I was in my first year out of my 3-year law course. And history repeated itself. I joined his office, and within a week, 10 days, I knew that the plan that I'd hatched a year ago about working in a corporate setup, it was out of the way entirely, and I wanted to do litigation and criminal litigation at that. And from there on, I decided that, of course, I will not take this decision for myself till I have not explored enough. So the next 2 years, I spent interning at 9 different places. So, all notable senior advocates. I went to independent lawyers. I went back to Trilegal to see if I still feel the same way about working in a tier one law firm, doing corporate litigation, and regulatory litigation was my primary interest at that time. But then I realized that my love for litigation had surpassed that. So I stood corrected. So that's when I got my PPO from Tulsi sir, I knew that at the end of it, I would join him, and it's of course been an honor working with him. So that is an entirely different ballgame. So what I would say, to sum it up and not take too much time on this question, is don't go out there with a mind with preconceived notions. There is no one way to being successful. A lot of people will try and tell you, and especially in this day and age of social media, we all seem like we are preaching, right? But there is no one path which would work for all of us. So you would have your own, you would make your own set of mistakes, but it would make you a better person for it. So, but just keep this in mind that you have to intern, and not intern just to have a certificate. And that learning should be absolutely essential, that when you go out there and you, wherever you're interning for that matter, you have to give it your best, because you never know when an opportunity strikes. You may end up making connections, which would help you get further internships, which could also convert into a pre-placement offer. So, or it could go terribly wrong and you don't perform, and then you get negative feedback, and that entire experience may be off-putting for you as well, that perhaps you don't even want to get into it in the first place. So go with an open mindset, but to work and work hard, and remember, and I'm deviating a little, I'm so sorry, but I'm addressing this one point, which I know a lot of people have posed to me in the last 2 years, is that why exactly are we paid so less in litigation? For the fact that you have to understand, it's a very different job than, say, being a software engineer. When you're a software engineer, during your degree, you've learned coding. So the only difference is how you apply it in different senses of the applications that you're making and then designing it, right? But when you're in law school, you've just understood how to read law. You haven't mastered it. You haven't learned how to practice it. So the initial years, when somebody is investing in you and taking you in as your junior, you also have to understand that they'll also bear the brunt of the repercussions if you mess up in any way. So it's very different than other kinds of jobs that are out there, because mostly in cases you already are trained before you start that job. But so is not the case when you are in law. So I just thought I'd address it right here, so that tomorrow you don't choose a job keeping only the monetary aspects in mind, because that wouldn't be right. There is absolutely no limit, and we can of course explore this later on as well, on how to choose um, corporate, whether go to a firm or have work under a litigation chamber. That
Yes.
also I'll address.
Thank you so much for that inciting details about the experience of your first internship. Moving on to the next question. Some law students decide a particular interest area at their early stages of law school and try to intern only in those areas. Is it important that one must intern according to what they would like to specialize in? What is your take on this, ma'am?
See, there is, um, like I said, first of all, only very, very few areas of law are such which are so niche that they're only practiced by a handful of people. Otherwise, by and large, a lot of us are doing both criminal and civil matters. Like, and I'll answer this giving a personal example as well. When I started out as an independent lawyer about 2 years ago, because I'd always thought I'd be a criminal lawyer, and I worked under a criminal lawyer, so I thought automatically that would make me one. But it only makes me one when I get that work. So initially, in the first couple of months, I kept waiting for bail applications to come to me or criminal appeals to come to me, and all the kind of work I had done, not realizing that, of course, Tulsi sir got it because he's who he is, and I may not immediately get it. So initially, I got like a lot of writs and service cases, and I started doing that, and turns out I liked them as well. So having said that, even though there's nothing wrong in knowing exactly what you want to do, but you also have to understand that unless you're doing something like competition law, or you're doing IPR, sports law, media law, that has limited application and is not widely practiced as well. So the on the upside, you can also specialize and be one of the very few people offering those services. But having said that, you have to understand that the clientele is also far less in that. So in your initial years, while you're interning or when you start off working under somebody, go where there is exposure to both if you're going in litigation. Because most senior advocates, you see, they're briefed. So they decide the brief that they take. And it's not that a criminal lawyer will not take up service matters or won't take up constitutional writ petitions, because at the end of the day, like things like constitution and criminal, they're connected. So no person can say I'm only a constitutional lawyer without having gone into the criminal and civil branches of it. So that kind of compartmentalization is not possible that early on. You should at least try out for the first couple of years to build your, because only after your practice do you also realize if you're good at it. There's one thing that I might find absolutely intriguing, but when it comes to, for example, winning a bail application, getting bail for somebody or getting an acquittal, though it sound very, very, very fancy, but a lot of people are not able to manage that kind of relief. So you have to also manage your expectations. You might find something very interesting, but you might not have the aptitude for it. And that's where you have to be very honest with yourself, because a lot of researchers have shown this, that you will perhaps be very successful if your aptitude and interest, they meet at a certain point. And the point at which they meet is going to be the one which is going to get you the maximum amount of success as well.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. So in our field, it is true that to secure internships in any reputed law firm or under any senior counsel, we need to have a number of contacts. So what would be the best way to get internship? Because some would suggest that we would like to contact them via LinkedIn, or some would just say we would directly mail them and requesting so that we can intern along with them. So what would be the best way to apply for an internship in a reputed law firm or under any senior counsel?
See, I'll tell you something, and I'll say it very candidly. Uh, while, of course, LinkedIn is doing very well and it's very popular among law students, and a lot of advocates are making, and associates and law firm partners are making an effort to communicate with the law students. It perhaps is not as easy as you dropping in a message and say, "Hi, I'm looking for an internship. Will you please grant me?" That a lot of people would not give you an internship just on the basis of a message. Maybe, of course, after perusing your CV, could be. And you might have some difficulty, breaking the ice, breaking through and getting the first couple of internships. But I'll tell you the most effective way, and even till date, even though I've myself gotten a lot of interns off LinkedIn, but I can say this, that not all of them were up to the mark. Because some people only want to intern because it's mandated, or they want it on their CV, or they want to show they have the experience. But I've seen that the places where it's where there is, I'm sorry, there was a snag. The places where it is absolutely important, so this guarantee of good performance is when I know somebody, like you call me up tomorrow and you say that I have a friend of mine, and I trust that you have good judgment, and you tell me that this person, he or she has worked really well, knows how to research well, or can draft well. In that way, I would rather have somebody recommend people to me after having seen them assess their performance. That's why I said that when you go to an internship, please remember that not only are you there to learn, your performance, the kind of interaction you have, if it has appealed to the other person, they will also go out of the way to help you get internships and refer you ahead. So I've also done that with a lot of people, and a lot of people did it for me when I was an intern. I also moved around from a lot of senior advocates' office in internships because some person was kind enough to help me through the process, and that's a lot more credible that way. So when you are out there in an internship, I would sincerely give you this as a suggestion, and I do that to everybody who comes to my office as well, that you are there to learn. There are a lot of things which you don't know, which will take a lot of time to understand. But just because somebody's given you feedback, that does not mean that it should be demeaning to you, or you should in any way be unsettled by it or be demoralized. If you work towards it and better your performance, and most of us can know in the first instance, in the first assignment, that how much this particular person actually knows. So you already know how to judge them in, say, the first day of the internship. So if you get you put across a good impression for yourself, you automatically will build that connection, and it will be a snowballing effect, and who knows, it will also turn out into a job. As far as social media is concerned, what I can suggest is that please, if you're going to be reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, please don't pester them at odd hours. It's not very professional to message people at 12 a.m. because you may think they are not reading it, but notifications do come. I've had people asking me at 2:30 in the morning for internships, and then if I say that, and just messages without CVs, as if looking at your photo, I'm supposed to judge, and in most cases there are no photos as well. So just do one thing: ask for their person's email address. Be kind enough to drop a cover letter with a CV, month mentioned, because you don't want somebody to go through your email only to reply and say that your CV is missing, or the month on which you in which you want to intern is not mentioned. That automatically would lead to your elimination in a lot of cases, because maybe somebody doesn't have the time to reply to 100 emails. So they'll also sift through and see whichever has been is politely addressed the email. The words matter. So you can't say, I want an internship under you. There's you have to learn that etiquette of speaking, and different levels of lawyers, and everybody has a different class of lawyers. And I'm sorry, it sounds very discriminatory, but that's that's the truth, and you have to adjust to it. So everybody has like a certain set of standard that they can keep for themselves, and they also want people of the same standard coming to their offices. So if you want to be working at chambers of reputed lawyers, go to good law firms, you also have to adjust yourself. These are things you need to understand more practically. And if nothing works, go on the Supreme Court website, High Court website, and there are the email addresses of the senior advocates, advocates on record. It's all mentioned over there of the Supreme Court and the High Court. So you just take it out, research a little about them, what area of law do they practice, and shoot emails. And please don't shoot mass emails. They also come to know, and nobody will. The chances of you getting a reply on a mass email is pretty less, because then the general perception is that perhaps somebody else would have granted you the internship anyway. So please, at least the least you can do is take out some time. If you're sending out 10 emails, send 10 separate emails, because we come to know that when it's an undisclosed recipient, people won't generally reply to you. These are just practical tips you need to understand.
Moving on to the next question, ma'am. Everyone is very fascinated and keen to intern at the Supreme Court. At what stage should a law student apply for an internship at the Supreme Court?
I think there is no formula for it. My first internship was there, but yes, for that, and I'm not saying being boastful and saying that I can do it but others can't. There's nothing like that. When you go there, whichever, whether it's a district court, high court, or Supreme Court, now all three of them have different benchmark in terms of the amount of research is required and the level of drafting that they do. So you just have to be prepared for that. There may not be as much research and drafting work in district courts, because their pleadings are far more shorter as compared to in Supreme Court, right? So you just have to be prepared, and if you're not confident that you won't be able to manage that kind of research, if you don't know how to access Manupatra, SCC online, or even Indian Kanun for that matter, or you don't know the simplest thing of how to, even look at a commentary. A lot of students, when they come for their first internship, they don't know that very practically. They don't know how to look at an SCC reporter either, or read a judgment for that matter. You have to understand this, that no lawyer or office is going to essentially sit down and spoon feed you these concepts. So don't go with the mindset that I'm going to apply under a Supreme Court lawyer, and in 1 month I'm going to know the know-how of Supreme Court. That's not going to happen. Nobody has that kind of time, because you have your deadlines, as does the associate you're working under. So you might get guidance. You could perhaps look at offices which have a strength of about 10, 12 people, because then a lot of people means that somebody or the other would have the time to sit down with you. Smaller concentrated offices wouldn't have, even the one-on-one interaction will be a lot more, but then the workload is also there as comparatively. So if you're not confident to go directly to Supreme Court in your first internship, then you perhaps wait after an internship or two, when you've understood at least how to use the research database. And it wouldn't be out of place to ask for drafting work, whether it's a legal notice. It can be as simple as that. It's all right. You won't get it right in the first case. But what you can at least do is, nobody can sit and spoon feed you or dictate how exactly it's drafted. If you're sitting in a chamber or in an office, there are files lying around everywhere. Pick up a file and start reading it. That's the best way to learn the formats. You make your own notes. That's essentially what I did in my 3 years and in my first year as an associate. I wasn't marked so many matters back then, so already had 10 other associates. So in my free time, whenever I had, I used to go to the reception, ask for a file, start reading it, and make my notes. That way I understood the basic format, the legal language you pick up. Then you also like some certain paragraphs which are so universal that can basically fit everywhere. Like anything you read on Article 21, any matter, any writ petition, 21 will have to be there. And you will know that a few excerpts from, say, Keshav Bharti, they're so universal, they can be used everywhere. In bail applications, you definitely use Siddham Ram Mehtre. In anticipatory bail, you use Gurbaksh Singh Sibia. So there are few judgments, few paragraphs. Once you know them, you know how to draft these things. Automatically, your experience would increase. So yourself have to be confident to intern under somebody. And of course, don't seek validation when you go for an internship. Don't let the other person put you down. There's a different thing giving feedback and saying that you haven't performed on this particular assignment well, but that does not mean that it's any way demeaning your aptitude. And a lot of people feel they they in a way get disheartened that I couldn't perform well and I don't think litigation is for me, or they say that we are apprehensive about speaking in public, so we don't want to go in litigation. So those kind of aspects also I'd like to address, if that's a part of the webinar as well. I think that's also very important.
So moving on, I would like to ask if, like we often see that interns do not do their internship with utmost dedication. Sometimes they end up with almost negligible learning due to their negligence. How important do you think our learnings in an internship are essential for practice?
It's absolutely essential. I think there is almost a lateral transfer of the learning from your internship to your job. Over here, you understand how. All right, so let's take it this way. There's a factual matrix that's come in front of you. Whether you're an intern or you're an associate, if it's come right in front of you, you are at liberty to apply your mind. At an internship, you understand that the way we read for our and prepare for our examinations is that we know what section 154 is, we know what section 202 is of CRPC, but do we understand the implications of how they have to be read together, or how CRPC has to be read with IPC, read with the Constitution? Sometimes it's a little boggling to understand that, oh, there's almost a connection with everything around it. That practice, how to actually get this entire essentially get this idea of reading things together and making a holistic sense of the statutes regulated under the Constitution. And that's just an example. You get an internship, that when facts come, how do you know what to apply? Then you understand the procedure. You understand how the drafting initiates. The smallest of things is that how many affidavits are required. With the main petition, with every application, what is a wakalatnama, how to get court fee, how the filing is done. You can possibly learn everything in an internship. It only depends on how much do you want to learn. There are some interns who feel, and I've personally seen that, who want to come in at 10 o'clock, give them some work, they will spend morning 2 3 hours, say they haven't found anything. After lunch, the same story continues. And you do that twice, and I'll tell you what, when you yourself don't put in that kind of effort, that does not mean the person who's allocated the work to you, delegated that work to you, will not themselves finish it. Because if the work has come in a particular office, they have to complete it, whether you do it or not. So please understand, as an intern, you're very dispensable. It sounds very harsh, but that's the truth. Nobody is indispensable. Sooner you learn that, because if you keep, you know, try to wriggle your way out of working, ultimately you won't get any work. But on the other hand, if you make a sincere effort, not only is the other person interested to teach you, because then you feel like, oh, I can give this person more because they seem to have more potential. So not only are you entrusted with a lot more responsibility, but automatically your learning graph also increases, and your chances of securing and doing well at a job. Most of all of us would get a job someday, right? But our success only depends on the amount of the way we perform when we've gotten something. That is the true indicator of how your success graph is. So that is all you need to keep in mind. Right now, the limited goal in which we study is that, get good marks, have to secure a good office with a good package. I think I speak for all when I say this. That is the majoritarian view on this. But what next when you get there? Whether you get promoted from associate to senior associate, whether you tomorrow become a senior advocate, that all depends on how you fare over there. So always keep that in mind. It's a lot more than just studying and reading law. It's the practicality that you have to understand, and internships are a great way for it.
Yes, ma'am. So moving on, you spoke about how first generation lawyers face problems in the current era. So how would you suggest that they would overcome them? Like, what are the steps they should take?
For first generation lawyers, and I can say this with quite confidence, is that I don't think first generation lawyers are at any way at a disadvantage, because a lot of people have this perception that when you're starting out with no contacts, no family background, there's not a set up practice, and you have to do everything from scratch, there is a certain disadvantage that comes along with this situation. But I beg to differ, because then you have the zeal. Farhan, if I may ask you, are you also a first generation to be first generation lawyer? That was evident, and I'll tell you why. Because you started law essentials, right? You came up with that idea because you knew there is no comfort zone here. It's not going to be cushy. There is not an office that is already set up for you, and all you have to do is get your degree and sit on a chair, and clients would be flooding in. You know that's not the situation. I knew that was not the situation. That's what makes it such an exciting journey, because then you know the sky is the limit, and you would work harder, and you would be recognized more. And the best part is, nobody would compare you to your family, because there's always this comparison that, unfortunately, all the big names and their kids and their siblings, they have to deal with. That, you have to step into those shoes, and those are very large shoes for some people to actually, in a way, fair making their own set of imprint on it, right? So over here, it's a far more exciting opportunity, because here you can create anything you want for yourself, and you would work twice as hard to keep it. I'll give you a very short example to understand this. How complacency is the single-handedly it is responsible for ruining your career, or at least making the chances of your success rate, declining the chances of your success rate. I'm so sorry. So this one particular case I was doing, and I've repeated the story, but it's a very apt example to give. Um, I was defending a person who required bail, and he was facing charges of gang rape with POXO, and he had already faced incarceration for more than 4.5 years at that time. And the advocate that he had hired had about 20-25 years of experience. However, despite that experience, he was not able to manage getting bail for my client in 9 attempts. So Sessions Court and High Court was invoked 9 times over a period of 4 years, and bail was not granted. So when they came to me, and of course they were skeptical because I'm young, I'm a first generation lawyer, they thought maybe, I won't manage. So all I asked was that, don't worry about the money. You pay me for the filing, and if I'm able to get you some relief, then you can pay me later after notice is issued or bail is granted, however. So, but my only condition was that you have to show me the entire set of documents, and I want to see what your other lawyer is making. So they were apprehensive. They thought I just want to copy paste and not work. But I was trying to explain that I want to see what is going wrong in the pleadings, that the judges are not understanding again and again. So when the files came, it was literally 2 sheets of bail application. The same one we get in a DPC format book. It was exactly that, with the details entered in, and that was it. So of course, we made an entire fresh bail application with all the evidence in it. And within the first hearing, bail was granted, and he's been out for over 6 months now. The only difference here is that because I knew that there is no fallback option for me, and if I'm not able to get some relief, of course I won't be paid, and plus I'll also create a bad name for myself, that I pushed to get this matter for myself and did not even succeed at it. On the other hand, for somebody who's been in practice for 20-25 years, they think that they'll just walk in and they have the face value. So what they write on paper is not enough. And while of course a lot of people have face value, especially when you only practice in certain courts. So somebody who only practices in Sessions Courts, there are only a few number of courtrooms they appear before, so that face value is automatically created. Same way in High Court, Supreme Court, such is the case. But you also have to think about it, that you must have filed this before me, and it goes to appeal to a different judge altogether. Face value is not always the best option, because you don't even know the amount of time that you have. I mean, I'm digressing at the moment, but I'm trying to make a point that why, on the other hand, of course, there are going to be a lot of problems in terms of, and I'll jump right into it because I see that I've spent a lot of time answering this. But yes, if you see from the problems aspect, the biggest question we have to ask ourselves is, when do we go independent? A lot of people keep questioning that, whether it's after 5 years, whether it's after 10 years. The best way to answer is when you feel that you've reached a stagnation point in your job, that you're doing the same thing over and over again without application of your mind. There's nothing new, there's nothing that's exciting you, you're not learning anything more, and there is this sort of complacency that has arisen in the job. That's the right thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Because that complacency would make sure, and I've seen it, and I don't want to name names, but I've seen people after 10, 12, 15 years they're not able to speak inside the courtroom because they've spent those many years briefing other lawyers. So when you don't make those mistakes in the initial years, like right now, if I make a mistake, I know I've only had very limited experience on my side, and the judge will also pardon me. But the same mistake, if I make after say 15 years into practice, then those things are they're unpardonable. So first of all, you see whether complacency has arisen, and second, you should know that if you think that you're becoming too laid back and you're not getting enough challenges, that's the time. And of course, at that time, you also have to keep in mind if you're financially comfortable enough. Keep it in mind that when you start off, for the first 6 months, things are going to be slow. It will pick up thereafter. So your family should be able to support you, and there should not be any such financial crisis impending on your head. And that's the time to venture into it. And though there will be drawbacks of how to get clients, how to retain clients, but I can tell you for a fact that if you work with utmost dedication and treat every case as a fresh case and not just copy paste grounds from previous drafts, which are not relevant to the facts and circumstances, and you actually apply your mind, it's a lot more difficult to retain clients than to get clients. Getting them is easier. These days, they don't need an NOC to replace you. So you have to understand, to build your reputation, to build your name, and to build the trust with your client, you should know that there are no shortcuts. Nobody not listening to me will help you, and I can say it very honestly. This is not going to help you. Only working out there every day with dedication over the years is the only way. There are no shortcuts. And the moment you start looking for shortcuts, then you know that there is a limited scope to your success.
Yes, ma'am. So now we will take a few questions from the participants to make the session a little more interactive. So if anyone has questions pertaining to internships, you can please unmute and ask your question.
Before we do that, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? We've done this questionnaire with students, and I'll answer everything. I'll sit for another 20 minutes to answer questions. But I have a very short question. You answer, anybody else who wants to unmute and answer. Everything I've said, do you agree? Because I also need to understand this. And don't say it. Don't say it just because it has to be. And I think, have you personally noticed that these things, whatever I've mentioned, any one of them, has been applicable to your situation? Or it's just
Yes.
my own opinion?
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Hi. Yes, ma'am. This is Shrishti Agarwal.
Yes, please.
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, the main confusion which I had for litigation is for going first generation. You actually cleared that. That it doesn't matter that if you're first generation lawyer, you can still go to in litigation. That was the main concern I was listening from everyone. That if you're for first generation, you should not opt for litigation.
Yeah, don't go independent right away. At least have some practical training, understand how uh, to hone your drafting skill a little at least, get research, make a network for yourself, that tomorrow when you're stuck with the brief, like sometimes it happens to me, there's so many things which I'm learning. So there may be a procedure which I haven't understood or dealt with before, but I have a network of my friends, of the people I worked under, and I can just ring them up and take their counsel. But that network is also very important for you to create. But don't let anybody tell you that you can't go to litigation if you're a first generation lawyer, because if you see yourself standing out there and arguing matters at the dais before the judges, then you should definitely go for litigation. Otherwise, you will only be being half true to yourself. And I don't think you should actually let anybody decide what you can or cannot do. I know
Okay,
it's
thank you
sounding more
so
like
much.
a motivational speech than clearing your.
No, ma'am. It actually gave me some different perspective from what I was hearing till now.
I can tell you for myself that when I also wanted to go independent, a lot more people told me that, at least hang on for another 2 years. 1 year prior experience before going into litigation is too less. Um, but they were proven wrong with time, because I stuck to my guns and I actually wanted to make it work, because when you are out there and you're doing things by yourself, then you have no one else to blame also, right? So your own success, your own failure, it's everything is in your own hands. So you
Yes, ma'am.
have to work towards it. And if you're ready for that challenge, then definitely don't listen to anybody. But yes, keep your finances in mind.
Yeah, sure. And ma'am, I have one more question.
Yes, please.
Being a 3 year student and that too from not non-NLU student, how difficult is to get internships?
It's not. I'll be very honest. Though, of course, a few officers say that NLUs, we only prefer fourth year penultimate students, or we prefer NLUs. Um, but a lot more people in litigation, the senior advocates, the advocates on record, they are very flexible. And if you want to go into litigation, then I don't think there's a better opportunity than working under an AOR or working under a senior. And if you have, see, it's a rolling effect. Once I had 2, 3 big names on my CV, it was easier to get the remaining senior advocates and, work under them. So automatically your CV creates this entire sequence that you are, at the end of the day, deemed to be somebody who has practical know-how to an extent, and who could possibly perhaps be an asset in the future. And that's the image that you have to retain.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
So don't worry, nobody's going to be you're not going to be hanging your CV next to your desk when you start working. So the marks you scored, however high, however low, whichever college you're from, I don't think, apart from webinars, people asking me, nobody's asked me in the last 3 years if I'm from DU or from an LSU. So it really doesn't matter. And no client will come up to you and ask you your educational qualifications first and then give you a case. All they need to understand is, do you understand their facts? Can you possibly try at getting them a best shot at relief? That's about it. Nothing else matters.
And ma'am, that is the part for litigation. And what about the firms, like law firms and everything? If we
I
want
think
to
that
join,
will be a session more suitable for somebody who's worked in a firm in that case.
okay,
I cannot pretend to comment on something I'm not very well aware of.
okay. Thank you, ma'am.
We can take another question if another person has it.
Yes, please. But I also have a question which I posed to you.
Yes, ma'am. Replying to that question, I think all the law students actually see it when they go for their internships at the district court, high courts, and all that. And it is the harsh reality, and they have to accept it. Many a times, the students don't really accept it at the start, but eventually they have to.
You have to, and it sounds very prejudiced to say that, if you want to work at Supreme Court, oh, there is this age-old vice also, and I don't think any more question is coming up right now, so I'll just suggest this in the meanwhile. Uh, there's this confusion whether you start with lower courts or you directly go and practice at the appellate courts. And that is a question that plagues a lot of people. So a lot of people told me that, unless and until you don't understand trials, how will you understand appellate courts? But I don't think there's a timeline for these things. You have to do it all simultaneously. You can't sit here and say that for the next 5 years, I only do trials and I make a schedule for another 5 years to only do appellate courts. That's not going to happen. And if you eventually plan to come and practice at the appellate courts, especially the Supreme Court, it's better that you get the exposure right from the beginning, because you at least understand the etiquettes. There is a certain way to address things in Supreme Court. There is a certain way of speaking, which is perhaps not so strict when it comes to district courts. So if, for example, for 2-3 years of your uh, working in the district court as practicing in the district court as a lawyer have passed, then of course you are also going to be more adjusted to the nuances of that particular court, and not as an everyday practice inculcate what is required at a different court altogether, right? So from there, when you take a shift from district to Supreme Court or High Court for that matter, that's why a lot of people, when they get comfortable at a particular court, they don't want to move, because then finally they're making more money at that place. You may do your first case for 5,000 rupees, but with time, with the creation of your face value, you will perhaps charge 50,000 for that matter, and your practice will expand in that particular court alone. Very rarely people switch from district court to high court or Supreme Court, and a lot of people do not even come to the high court if they're practicing in the district court, because the practice procedure and the etiquettes, the mannerism is absolutely different. So it won't hurt you if you understand how the high court or the Supreme Court functions, and then go apply the same in district court, because the reverse is not a problem.
We have another question coming in from Shivani SP. She asks, what is the relevance of internships if she's planning to pursue an LLM? No, ma'am, you're not audible.
What I'm saying is that internships are essential even if you have to do an LLM, for the fact that after an LLM, you are going to come back and practice, whether in a firm or in a litigation chamber. Uh, at the end of the day, you will start a job, right? So just because you feel that after this LLB, I'm going to be studying for another year and going abroad or studying here in India, but ultimately you will come back to the job market. Please also understand, for those of you who are planning to go for an LLM, if ultimately you have to work here in litigation, it's not so advisable to directly go for an LLM. Please get the feel of the subject and the specialization which you want to take, and perhaps you could go and sit for an LLM later on, after maybe 2-3 years of experience, because at that time you would have a better sense of the subjects that you like, that interest you, and you want to read in deeper, in depth. Sorry. From salary perspective, it doesn't make a difference if you are solely an LLB or you also have an LLM if you're in litigation. So the salary is going to be standardized in a chamber. If it's going to be say 25,000, 30,000, it's going to be whether you are a freshly graduated LLB or if you've gone one step ahead, spent a few more lakhs and gotten an LLM. That's pari material. So if you think that your job aspects are going to get enhanced, perhaps it happens in firms, I'm not aware of it, but in litigation, it holds very little value in terms of your job market. Because again, that only means you have another degree, but the degree is not the point. The point is whether you have the practicality. That practical information is what the in future prospective employer is looking for you, not whether you know the jurisprudence. These are very, like a very candid way, not trying to discourage you, but think about it this way, because I was also given the same advice when I wanted to pursue LLM before joining practice, and that's what I was told, and it's been very helpful. And I don't think now after 3 years I would want to pursue an LLM, because you can't just abandon everything and go.
I think we can take one last question before we come to the end of the session. If anyone has a question, they can unmute and ask. So, ma'am, I have another question for you. So what do potential recruiters, law firm? Okay, you can go ahead. Is there anyone asking the question? Okay. What do potential recruiters like to see in a CV of a law student? Like, do they prefer that the law student should have specialized in a particular area, or they must have worked in diverse areas?
I can tell you for a fact, and I'm in touch with a lot of senior advocate offices, nobody sees your CV. As sad as it may be, your CV is only an indicator whether you've interned. But when you sit for an interview, like, okay, I'll tell you what if for this webinar, I would have uploaded my CV, right? Some of you would be impressed. Others would be like, nothing too fancy. Based on that, you would come and join this webinar. Then you would hear me speak. But that does not mean my CV is not an indicator of whether you agree with me or like what I've said, or you've essentially taken anything from this webinar, right? So the same thing applies for a job interview. Like I've emphasized this in the last 1 hour, your CV is not an indicator of how well you perform at your job. And when this person sits in front of you, all you need to understand from them is if A, they understand the basics. No person is there's no expectation that a fresher would have knowledge of every possible thing. We know that you won't understand the procedure. You won't understand the smallest of things. Sometimes people don't even know how to read the High Court board because it's different from a Supreme Court board and very different from a District Court board. So as simple as that, item numbers you don't know how to read. And we know that you have to be taught all of those things. The only indicator is A, does that appear that this person has the zeal to learn? And B, how much? Or I mean, the reaction this person is going to give when you're going to give negative feedback. Because only then that is the true indicator of whether or not any criticism can be given, whether your work can be critiqued, whether openly feedback can be given, and whether this person is actually going to make that effort to give it 100% rather than just pass the buck and say I haven't found anything or try and do shortcuts. Your personality analysis is more important because automatically people categorize you that okay, it doesn't look like this person is too academically inclined, then perhaps they can only assist in the filings or run around for passovers or small matters. But then the moment you come across a person who exhibits all these signs, who is keen to learn, has that zeal to better themselves, you automatically want to have such people, because then you know that people like these do not want that their impression, the other person has a negative impression of their performance. So they will go out of the way and give it their best to get the best results. And those kind of go-getters are the ones which are preferred than just seeing the CV and see that you've interned at 10 places, because we all know how much people actually work at internships. Not everybody does.
Yes, ma'am. With this, we come to the end of our session. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your valuable time out and being with us and giving inciting experiences and details about the actual litigation. So I would like to tell you more about Law Essentials. We are coming out with 2 certificate courses by the end of this month. To know more about these certificate courses, please log on to www.lawessential.in. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that this session did add some value, and I did not just bore all of you for the last 1 hour.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.